BRICS leaders will meet in South Africa next week for the 15th summit to discuss how to turn a loose club of nations accounting for a quarter of the global economy into a geopolitical force that can challenge the West's dominance in world affairs. Russian President Vladimir Putin, who faces an international arrest warrant over alleged war crimes in Ukraine, will not join leaders from Brazil, India, China and South Africa amid rifts over whether to expand the bloc to include dozens of global South nations queuing up to join. The summit begins this August from the 22nd to the 24th. Joining us now on the morning show is His Excellency Thamsanqa Dennis Mseleku, South Africa High Commissioner to Nigeria. Good morning, Your Excellency, and welcome to the morning show.
Good morning, and thank you very much for having me. Excellent.
Now, the world is looking forward to the BRICS summit coming up in South Africa in a week's time, next week. I'd like you to share with us some of the focus areas, the main conversation areas from next week.
Well, thank you very much. As you've said, the world is looking forward to South Africa hosting the BRICS summit, which is called the BRIC Plus summit. The theme which is actually selected by South Africa, focuses on three areas. One is inclusive economic growth, which actually looks at how we can grow the economies of the South through cooperation and through market access. And secondly, we're also looking at sustainable development in the context of the climate changes that are taking place in the world and other challenges that are facing our planet. The BRICS nations are going to look at issues of sustainable development. How do we ensure that the development, because most of the South is actually developing nations, and therefore we're looking at balancing development with sustainability. And of course, the third aspect is looking at the transformation of the economic and the governance structures of the world. For example, the transformation of the IMF, World Bank, including the Security Council itself. We need to ensure that it's much more representative, much more participatory from various nations. If you take the Security Council, for example, the African continent as a whole is not even represented in the permanent structures of the Security Council. So those are the three broad areas that are going to be focused on in terms of our theme.
All right, sir. So good to see you, Mr. Ambassador. We are looking at what is going on in the rest of the world. It's clear from all the statements that we've received so far that the president, the leader of Russia, will not be attending. How does BRICS feel, the members, the leaders of the other countries that form BRIC, how do they feel considering the fact that President Putin will not be there?
Well, that's one of the concerns of BRICS, that we have a situation where the structures of the world are actually determining how the rest of the world must behave, and that is actually dominated by one or a few states as such. And one of the things that we're talking about in terms of transforming the governance structures is indeed the challenge to ensure that we move away from the unilateral dominance of a single state or a few states into a much more inclusive and democratic governance approach. So they understand the position of South Africa, that we have been put in a very difficult position where we have to comply with the decisions of the International Court. But at the same time, they are aware that that is actually a process that is triggered by some very funny processes that have not necessarily been transparent. So both President Putin himself and the rest of the BRICS leaders understand therefore the need for us to actually continue the conversation on how we transform the governance structures of the world.
So I was just going to follow up with that are you implying by any stretch of imagination that what's going on between Ukraine and Russia is not of enough significance for the rest of the world to appreciate the fact that no matter what the West does, Russia shouldn't have a reason to attack Ukraine?
Well, we take it as a country, as South Africa, we do realize that what is happening at the moment is of very serious significance to the world. Right now, you know that the African continent is actually challenged when it comes to agricultural products like grains, for example, because of what is happening there. But not only that, the economies of the South are actually being impacted by what is happening in between Russia and Ukraine. Our belief is that this is an unnecessary war. These things should have actually been settled through roundtable, through discussions, and can still be solved if the negotiations are taken seriously. However, there are parts of the world that actually are fanning the war. They don't want this war to end. Instead, they want to force everybody to take their own position, which is to say, let them actually support Ukraine more than Russia. We don't support anybody in relation to this war. We condemn the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, but at the same time, we are also saying that we need to resolve these crises of the world, not in accordance with with the beliefs of certain groups of people, but with what the world would benefit through the resolution of those conflicts through negotiations. So that is our position as a country.
So invariably, South Africa is supporting Russia in all of this. Your Excellency, I put it to you that way. Because everybody will feel that South Africa should take a stand where, like other nations has taken a stand. But this, we condemn what's happening in Ukraine, but there were also reports here and there as regards connections and frolicking with South Africa and Russia. And now you are saying, let us look at this objectively and dispassionately. Your Excellency, South Africa is in support of Russia, and that's why a lot of Africans are looking at you as regards the BRICS summit. What do you say about this?
Well, we have taken a stand. Our stand is against the perpetuation of the war. Conflicts never solve anything. They destroy nations, they destroy countries, they actually create havoc, particularly and as it impacts on the poor. So ours is a very, very firm stand. The stand is that we do not support the war in Ukraine. We also don't support military solutions to that war in Ukraine. That's a very firm stand. It's not actually dilly-dallying about anything. The rhetoric that is coming out to saying we support Russia in this is actually because we do not vote with people who want war. We don't vote with warmongers. We vote with peacemongers, and therefore we will continue to stand our ground to say our position is clear. Let's encourage negotiations on the Russian-Ukraine conflict, not more war, more weapons, more whatever. We're not taking anybody's side. But remember, the very people that are saying we're friends of Russia, we are also friends to them too. We're friends to everybody else, so we have not taken anybody's side.
Okay. Your Excellency, those people don't think like that. Now they think anew about South Africa and they feel, wow, here you go, South Africa. Because when you look at it deeply, this is the same South Africa that has not been able to condemn the actions of Russia and an aggressor in this case. It was the Russians that invaded Ukraine in February. Your Excellency, I put it to you. Will you on this show condemn Russia for the invasion of Ukraine?
We have clearly said we condemn any country that invades the integrity of another country. And therefore, we condemn that action, and we've actually been very clear about condemning the action of
Your
any
Excellency,
invasion.
can you condemn Russia for invading Ukraine?
Let me finish that. We condemn any country, whether it's Russia or somebody attacking Libya and all that. We condemn any action of any country that invades another country. That's the position of the world, and we condemn it. However, condemnation of that does not mean we are blind to the other realities that are involved in that. We condemn those that actually become warmongers and want to give more arms to one side instead of trying to get the parties to actually come together. We condemn that too.
Thank you, Your Excellency.
All right, Your Excellency, just to ask you what South Africa's stance is on the possibility of expanding the BRICS bloc to accommodate other countries. Over 40 of them has been reported angling to be a part of BRICS. And what advantage or perhaps disadvantage would that be to that particular bloc?
Well, let me start by saying the expansion of BRICS actually started as a discussion at the founding of BRICS itself. In 2009, you remember that it was Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And we came in to say, no, you cannot exclude the African continent. And perhaps we would want to inject that kind of discussion. So we want to be invited to BRICS in order to ensure that we speak for the African continent so that more countries can actually participate in BRICS. And so that's when the expansion started, by us being included in the first place. And then when we first chaired BRICS in South Africa, we decided that as we chair BRICS, we will invite African leaders to come and join BRICS, and it became BRICS Plus. It was us that introduced that concept, and all the other BRICS nations, when they were chairing, began to actually invite regional leaders too. And therefore, this has been an ongoing conversation supported by South Africa. And then we've had applications from more than 21 countries and interest from more than 67 countries actually having an interest in joining BRICS. And this summit is actually likely to finalize some of the principles that the shepherds of BRICS were asked to go and look at as to what would actually allow a country to be able to join the BRICS group. The advantage, of course, is that this is 27% already. The current one is 27% of the economy of the world in BRICS at the moment, and we are expanding the market. We're also looking at alternatives to the dominant economic models that are actually there, including the currency issues which are dominating the world and creating some kind of a context where the world is blackmailed by those currencies. So there's a lot of advantage. Of course, South-South relations which actually create openness and democracy in a world that is becoming unipolar. So this is where you should be. BRICS is where all the South-South nations should be.
All right, Mr. Ambassador, I must say I love the idea of BRICS, and I love the fact that South Africa is actively involved in BRICS. But here is the concern of a number of Africans that we have BRICS, it should be encouraged. There are other organizations that will bring nations together to drive their agenda, and that is excellent as well, just like BRICS and others. Now, here is the issue. What can we do as Africans to strengthen the hands of AU and to strengthen the regional organizations within the continent to make it such that no Nigerian will need a visa to South Africa. No South African will need a visa to any part of the continent. The business within the continent is made to be more important than business with Russia and any other part of the world. What do we need to do to make that the focus much more than BRICS or AU or NATO or any other organization?
Well, I'm interested in that your last statement actually lists BRICS in the same vein as AU and NATO and others. The African Union, when it was founded and it was launched in South Africa, one of the key issues that it was going to face was how to integrate the continent economically, and hence the issue of the introduction of the Africa Free Trade Agreement, which in fact is now in place. And one of the key issues of that Africa Free Trade Agreement is to ensure that we establish the structures that would actually strengthen economic interaction, trade between African countries, because that's a key to the liberation of the continent from the shackles of the outsiders, as it were, whoever they are. So while we continue to actually strengthen the structures such as the African Union, the Africa Free Trade Agreement, part of it is the reality that we are all trading with all these other parts of the world, West and East, and we need to be able to ensure that that trade too continues to be free. Free trade, which has no barriers, because if it has barriers, then it has an impact on our objective to strengthen the Africa Free Trade Agreement and the interaction economically between countries. You also talk about political integration, which then will go to the issues of free movement of the people. We are not there yet. We have actually established the principles for free movement of people. However, we are also still engaged with a number of aspects of that integration, which will make it easier for the free movement of people. We cannot just jump into free movement without actually looking at the mechanisms, because that will, instead of strengthening the African continent, will weaken the African continent in many ways. So what are we doing? We are a very active member of the African Union in all its aspects, including the Africa Free Trade Agreement. In fact, the Secretary General, the first Secretary General of that Africa Free Trade Agreement actually is a South African, because we were very, very clear that all our African brothers and sisters were very much insistent that we put that candidate there who had actually led many of the negotiations from the South African side, and we were very confident that he will take the matter forward. So we are very, very strong when it comes to integration of the African continent.
All right, real quickly, two questions. Number one will be about this your new visa scheme for Nigerians to come into South Africa. I hear you people have made the process a lot better. Can you talk to us about that? And secondly, some US lawmakers actually want South Africa to face consequences for supporting Russia amid Ukraine war. That was a story that came out on the 14th of June 2023. CBS reported that out of America. What's your take on that? And this your new visa scheme. I hear it's now better for Nigerian businesses going to South Africa, a 10-year stretch visa duration. Tell me more about it, and talk about the sanctions some US lawmakers want for South Africa over the Russian war.
Well, let me start with the second one. Our president had to actually send envoys to the US in order to actually explain our position, because people take these issues emotionally without actually getting into the nitty-gritty of understanding why we are taking certain views. So we did hear that there are those that are actually pushing for us to face sanctions, and we responded to that. We are still in interaction with the US. The US is one of our biggest markets as such, and we continue to interact with them. So we don't have a problem. They have a right to engage in their discussions and take political positions. We don't doubt that, but we also have a right to explain ourselves. We hope they'll be persuaded. In the end, they are not warmongers. They are people who are really doing that because they want peace in the world. So that's where we are on that matter. With regard to the visa issue, yes, indeed, what we have said is what we want to identify genuine business people the CEOs, the chairpersons of companies, the COOs, and the regular travelers, not only just from companies, but the regular travelers and business people, so that we can actually give them longer-term visas. They don't have to come and be clogged by the system, because we have many applicants that clog the system, and then they get lost in the process, lost in translation, as it were. So that is what we are actually doing, and it's streamlining in some way for business people, because we want to do business. That's part of our integration strategy.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. We're out of time, but thanks for your insightful responses to the questions this morning, and we hope that you have a fruitful and impactful deliberation next week at the BRICS Summit.